Hey everybody, christopherodd here, and today I want to introduce you to a game called Warsaw that I've been following for a little while now. If you haven't heard about it, Warsaw is heavily Darkest Dungeon inspired, but it's taking place in the World War II era, specifically in Poland. And so there are some heavy story elements, but the core gameplay mechanics and even some of the art style is very reminiscent of Darkest Dungeon, albeit with a couple of unique changes that really set it apart. So this is the review build. Certain balance things might change. The game is releasing when you see this video, so I'll have links down below if you want to check that out. It's available on Steam. And let's just get in here and show you guys what Warsaw is all about. Now, when you start the game, you can pick to skip the tutorial and randomize the party, but I don't think it does as good of a job as kind of introducing the setting to us. So we're going to start with the tutorial in the default party, but I'll skip parts of the tutorial that I can just explain a little quicker. So let's get going. The year is 1944. Battered by opposing forces on two fronts, the Third Reich begins to crumble. In Central Europe, Poland lies at the heart of the storm, caught between the waning Nazi oppression and the rising Soviet threat. There's little hope for release. Despite the unfavorable odds, the Polish Home Army, now an underground resistance movement, is given the go-ahead by the country's government in exile. As the final part of the countrywide Operation Tempest, they're set to launch one last act of defiance, an uprising in Warsaw, Poland's capital city. August 1st, 1944, the W hour. The first skirmishes begin. Now, I'm no Wayne June, but, you know, if that was the Darkest Dungeon announcer, I wouldn't feel too bad about it. Okay, so the uprising begins, but they're going to show us a tutorial, and some of them I'll go through maybe a little bit more in detail. Some of them we'll skip because I can explain it a little bit faster. So the first thing is just exploration around the city. If you want to pause this and read through all of this, feel free. But the general gist is that we have our objectives up here. We're going to be moving around the map by clicking and essentially holding it down so that our icon moves towards the cursor. And that's using up AP. Now, it'll take you a little bit to get a sense of how much AP is being used per section of the map that you're covering. But it's really important because in a lot of missions, you're going to be exploring and having to find specific things or specific engagements. And if you run out of AP, you're toast. So it's very important to manage that correctly. Now, there's three different types of encounters that we're going to run into. There's enemies, there's loot, and multiple choice or text events. Certain enemies are going to force you into combat if they spot you in their danger zone. That's represented by the circle that's around them. You can consult the icon to check to see if they can see you. Now, just because the icon might be closed doesn't mean that they can't still attack you. I think it might be chance-based. The little arrows that we see are just showing that there's encounters nearby. If you don't see any, just kind of explore the city until something comes up and you know where you want to be going. So we have something coming up here. This is in the tutorial the same every time, but this is basically saying you need ammunition before you can join the fight. So we're going to have a text event here. It's not necessarily loot, although we are just getting loot in this specific scenario, but there's kind of a story part behind it. So before you set out for the rally point, the first order of business is to arm yourself. Your team arrives to receive their assigned share of ammunition from a resistance arsenal, and not a moment too soon. A Nazi patrol appears in the distance, likely alarmed by the unusual activity in the district. If you want to rendezvous with the uprising, you'll have to fight your way through. So this is the three basic resources that we have to manage before we go out on any mission. You have to make sure that you're bringing adequate amounts of ammo for the types of guns that your characters are using. So we're getting 180 short, 160 long, and 50 heavy ammo, all filling up different types of guns, okay? Now, some events, not the one that we just had, but some that we might run into, might give us multiple choices to pick from. And what we do is basically run a skill check against all of our characters. They have different attributes in the background, things that they're good at, things that they're not. And you can see what your percentage chance of being successful with any given choice is when you hover over it. So it'll be much easier to just show when that comes up in a mission. But for now, we're going to continue. So let's grab the loot that we just got. Supply drops, resource caches, and discarded weaponry while in the field. You're going to run into these opportunities to retrieve equipment for the uprising. Of note, and this is really important, items left in caches remain there till the end of the mission. So, because you have a limited amount of AP, if you're just exploring for loot before doing objectives, pretty good chance that you're going to run out of AP and then you lose. You lose that mission. So, what I would recommend is keeping an eye on your AP and trying to get a feel for how far you can venture off the path before you're going to be in trouble, and limit the hoarding because you will inevitably run out of loot. Okay, so we're going to have our first battle here. Again, it will introduce the mechanics to us. I'll try to explain some of them in a little bit more detail if necessary. So, in Warsaw, and by the way, I'm going to make a lot of comparisons to Darkest Dungeon. It's a game that I'm familiar with, and it's a game that this is quite obviously inspired by, as I mentioned at the beginning. But combat works quite a bit differently than in Darkest Dungeon, although there are some similarities. So we begin each round with a number of activations or turns. Okay, so each of these symbols represents our turns. The number of turns or activations that you get is based on the number of combatants or characters that you have. So as an example, we have 3, we get 3 turns. They have 2, they get 2 turns. That's pretty simple. We're going to start off by selecting Christoph, which is probably a horrible pronunciation, but I'm doing my best. And we're going to go into his skills to see what we can do. So they want us to use the target acquired skill. And before we select it, let me just walk you through how this works. If you're familiar with Darkest Dungeon, again, the boxes at the top are going to be very easily understood by you. If you've never played Darkest Dungeon, then it might be a bit confusing. So the blue boxes and the red boxes. Blue indicates where you must be positioned on your 8 square grid in order to use that skill. So because we're positioned in the back part of the grid, we can do that. And the red indicates which parts of the grid on the enemy side you can target. The area represents how many squares total that you're targeting at the same time. So there are AoE effects and things like that to keep in mind. It also shows us the required ammo is 6 long ammo, noted by the icon, and deals 16 to 20 damage, accuracy of 85%, crit of 15%, armor penetration of 5%. This is important, although the tutorial doesn't actually explain this. Armor penetration deals with enemy resilience. So if you look down here, when you hover over an enemy, he's got a resilience of 15%. We penetrate 5% of that, which means he's effectively reducing damage taken against this skill by 10%. Hope that makes sense. Also of note, at the bottom, it says it ignores cover. We'll talk about cover in a minute. And it spends a stamina. One of the coolest parts about combat is how they handle the stamina. So we'll talk about that in a second as well. Okay, so let's grab this. And we're going to go ahead and target this guy that they want us to. Notice you can also get a good idea of the spacing here. There's 8 total slots, and something may or may not be in each of them. This is cover, this is cover, this is cover, and we'll get into that. Okay, so he did 16 damage. It's on the lower end of the scale, but he did have some resilience, so it's okay. Now, we've successfully damaged an opponent with our skill, but it cost us some ammunition and a point of stamina. So stamina, if you hover over any of these when this box is not here, it's essentially going to show you this. At 3 stamina, you have no penalties. At 2 stamina, accuracy is reduced by 10%. At 1 stamina, all damage received is increased by 20%. And at 0 stamina, this combatant cannot be activated at all. Now, each round that happens, so after all the turns go through and it flips over to the next round, all combatants are regenerating a point of stamina. But the important thing is this. In a game like Darkest Dungeon, typically what's happening is each hero that's out on the battlefield is taking a turn. You go, and then the enemy goes, and you go, and then the enemy goes. But you're going through each of your heroes, or in this case, characters or soldiers or whatever you want to call them. And in Warsaw, what's really cool is that you could, in theory, use all of your activations on one of your characters. And that's where the stamina comes into play, because the more you use a character, the lower their stamina goes, and you have to wait for that to recharge for them to be at max effectiveness. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you fight and battle, but it also means that you can't just spam your best character all the time, because they're going to be at a significant disadvantage. So we talked about the area bar representing how much they're hitting. Now they have a grenadier who just attacked us. We both took damage, and that's represented by this area when you're highlighting a skill, how many tiles it's going to impact. Some skills, none that we have right now, but some skills will hit both rows, and these rows are really important. We're going to talk about flanking in a second. So she's got a first aid skill. This works as you imagine. She can use it from any position on the left, and she can heal any position. So we're going to go ahead and heal Christoph.
Trzeba to opatrzyć.
He healed for 20. You can get a good summary too of like all of the things on our side, all the things on their side. Cover is going to matter, which conveniently they're bringing up right now. So if we stand right behind the obstacles, it grants them additional armor, reducing the damage that they receive. Keep in mind, however, the obstacles will get damaged too. So these will eventually get used up and disappear. But for the time being, it's important to try and utilize them if we can, because we'll just take significantly less damage. So they want us to grab Christoph again, and we're going to talk about our last two auxiliary skills. So one of them is for movement, and that does use up stamina. One of them just says, hey, you know what? I don't want to do anything this turn. I'm gonna skip my turn. It's going to use up one of your activations or turns, but it's not going to take away stamina. If you move, it's going to take away stamina. It wants us to move into a better position, so that's what we'll do. We're going to select this, and it wants us to actually move him back here. The reason that they're suggesting for us to move him back here is based on his skills. So if you'll notice, he does this skill from the back 4 slots, this skill from the back 4 slots. He can single shot from anywhere. But you might be thinking, well, why not just move up into cover? Because he can't use his skills from up there. He can only use this single shot, and then he can only target a specific section. For the tutorial, it's really just showing us how to move characters around. But the general idea stands, is that you really have to consider your positioning in order to pull it off correctly. Okay, so now the turn's flipped over. Everybody regenerated 1 point of stamina. We're going to use Christoph again. We're going to use target acquired. Now, target acquired also ignores cover. So although this guy's not right behind it, it's still something to consider. But compared to single shot, I think it costs twice as much ammo. So that's something to think about. Now, flanking. This is cool. So because we have these 8 slots, we have 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom. When you're attacking somebody in the opposite horizontal row that you're in, then you get an extra 15% damage applied to whatever damage roll that you do. This applies both to your party and the enemies. Doesn't apply to heavy weapons or armored units. Okay? So let's take a look at what we can do. So from him, we're going to target the enemy grenadier. Also notice in the top right by the grenadier's portrait, it's going to show us what our accuracy is, which takes into account our base accuracy, any debuffs that we might have, any buffs that we might have, and the enemy's dodge. Okay, so his dodge right now is at 5%, and our target acquired accuracy is at 75%. So if we look here, that's why we have the total of 70. Anyways, let's target him. Now, the one thing that I wish it would do is show us what the extra damage done by flanking was. We rolled a decent amount of damage there, and we did, I think, what was it, 19? But it'd be cool just to signify the extra damage dealt by flanking, just because I'm a nerd like that. Anyways, now it wants us to use Casimir's. By the way, if I'm pronouncing any of this stuff incorrectly, feel free to let me know and I'll try to learn it. Because they're all Polish, and I'm not. Although I would love to be. Okay, we're going to use a buff. He's got a really cool one called Contraband Ammunition. So similar to Darkest Dungeon, where you can apply like Bleed or Blight, Warsaw can apply a couple of these things as well. Warsaw has Burn, it has Bleed, it has Suppression, and it has Blind. So what this skill does is it has an 80%, it'll apply either Burn or a Bleed chance up to 80%. So we're going to use this, and we're going to target Christoph. So it's given him the Bleed chance of 80%, which means now when we attack, we can inflict damage over time that lasts for a certain number of ticks, okay? And we'll learn about ticks, I think, in a second here. Anyways, now they're going to go, we're going to use Christoph to take a shot. And notice he had a skill that like repositioned one of our guys. So he's out in front of the cover, which is, you know, pretty bad. And if we were doing this ourselves, we'd want to reposition him back somewhere so that he can use all his skills. Anyways, some skills can apply debuffs. Burn and Bleed inflict damage over time. Blind decreases accuracy. He's got Suppression, and this prevents the target from performing skills altogether. Kind of like a stun in Darkest Dungeon. Like with buffs, each activation and round decreases the debuff's remaining duration. Try to apply a debuff to your opponent now. So we're going to select Christoph. He has the Bleed chance provided by Contraband ammo that was given to him. We're going to use Single Shot, and they want us to target the Rifleman. Did 24 damage, plus now he's bleeding 7 to 8 every tick. Okay, tick is a round. This concludes the guided combat mechanics tutorial, and now we're going to take over and try and deal with this. Now, the interesting thing about Warsaw that I guess it's the exact same as Darkest Dungeon, but I think in a perfect world, you want to try and mow down one hero or one enemy at a time, because that removes an activation, and that just means they have less chance to deal damage to you. So very similar approach to the Darkest Dungeon strategy. That's my recommendation anyways. So if we can kill off this guy, we only need to deal 6 to 7 damage to him for him to die next time. So let's go ahead and see if we can just use Single Shot on him. It's 85% accurate, but I want you to pay attention to one thing here. Our stamina is going to go to 0, which means for the remainder of these activations, we cannot use him anymore. And he's also getting 20% extra damage in his current state because he's at 1 stamina, and his accuracy is reduced by 10. So there you go. We could also move him and try to or we could also target a different guy and try to apply damage over time to him, which might not be a bad idea. But there's also a chance we probably just straight kill this guy. Yeah, he does 21 damage, so let's do it. We can't do anything, but now we only have one enemy to deal with. So we could have used another guy to do it too, but I wanted to show you what happens and how you have to manage this stamina. Okay. So we could heal a bit. We could take cover if we want. This is an AoE, so this hits 2 tiles horizontally and for 6 ammo. Single Shot uses less ammo, but it can't target anybody in the front. Notice the red squares in the back. Full auto can hit people in the front. She can hit people in the back line only, or if she's in the front of the group, she can do repelling fire, which pushes an enemy back 1 tile. I guess in this scenario, our best option is probably to just use full auto, even though we're not taking advantage of hitting the 2 tiles. It also does something cool with, like, where can I see it? Here, mow down is an example. So a lot of skills have something like you deal 10% less damage to subsequent targets, penetrate 10% less resilience of each subsequent target. So yeah, it has an AoE of like 3 horizontal tiles, but for each person that it hits, it's doing decreased damage, which I just think is a cool mechanic. Let's do this. So he's down to 3 health, and I think we'll just take another shot with him. Now, one thing eventually we're going to have to be considering is how much ammo this stuff costs, because if you don't bring enough ammo, makes things really difficult. Now, luckily, we haven't like missed any of our shots. We've been pretty on point, but you'd be surprised the amount of misses that fly back and forth. Now, death and survival. Death is permanent, so whether in battle or event, is vital to keep your characters alive and well, especially since their health does not replenish automatically. Certain rewards may appear promising. Sometimes it's better to limit your risks and avoid combat altogether. And in my testing, I can vouch for that because there's been times where I'm trying to explore the city and you either end up taking a fight you don't want to take, or end up expending too much of your overall health or running out of AP, and it's all dangerous out there, man. You'll notice down here that we have these things called injuries now. So characters who suffer damage above a certain threshold suffer an injury, and these are going to reduce their health even when they return to the hideout. They'll regenerate it slowly over time, and you can still take injured soldiers out. And this is represented by the lowest point of damage that they take. So if he was down to like, say, 10 at some point in that fight, even if we had healed him up to max, he's probably going to have like 3 injuries, which takes longer time to heal. So just something to be considerate of. Okay, let's check out this event. So it's Arrival. When the patrol gone, your team should have a clear path for now. And I think that's basic tutorial done. Having emerged victorious from their first real engagement, your team descends into the city's sewer network to reach the rally point. There's little time to celebrate, however, for the hard part comes next. The uprising is now in full swing and the long battle has begun. So we can return to the hideout, we can complete our mission. If there were other available encounters out here, because we have so much AP, it might be worthwhile looking around for other stuff, but because there's not, we're gonna wrap it up. So here's the stuff that we acquired. Here's a representation of our injuries and our specific insurgents. Now, this is a mission summary screen. Carrying out missions takes time. At the end of every mission, you're going to receive a quick summary of all the gains and losses. You'll also be able to resolve all the events that have transpired in the meantime. So basically, we go through 3 parts of a mission summary. The summary itself, which shows the date, what our current uprising is at. If uprising gets to 0, it's game over. There's morale and attrition in these districts, which we will talk about in a bit once we get back to the hideout. This talks about the health situation, so they've recovered 25% of their health. And it tells us what the event is that we're going to have to address once we proceed here. So it's points of contention. So this event, the uprising constantly needs new encampments and defensible positions, and today is no different. An effort to construct more barricades across the city launches, and every willing Varsovian is invited to join. However, such a project requires considerable material investments. So there's these kind of text-based decisions that come up in and out of combat. Some of them are addressed via our insurgents or characters' innate attributes, and some of them are just whatever we decide to do. So do we want to put efforts towards this? Let's do it and see what happens. So the uprising is going to need those barricades. You dedicate a considerable amount of resources to the cause. So we got 3 extra morale in Wola, plus 5% uprising momentum, and minus 15 supplies. Now, truthfully, we probably didn't need to do this because morale everywhere is pretty much maxed out because we're just starting. And our momentum is at basically 100%. It cost us 15 supplies, which isn't that big of a deal. So something to be considering. So here's our momentum. Here's the morale in all of these different districts, and attrition, which we'll talk about very soon. Let's proceed to the next day. Day 2. So now we're going to go into our base and manage our group. So I could skip the tutorial, but again, it's going to give us an overview, and then I'll kind of touch on some of the points. So basically what this is saying is here's all of our NPCs. These are our current and future party members. They'll all be listed here. Now you might be wondering, okay, how do we hire more people? Well, you kind of don't. You hire like temporary recruits. Other people that join you permanently come through story endeavors, which is kind of a cool way of doing it. Very different from Darkest Dungeon. I think one of the things that Warsaw is trying to do is really tell the story of how Poland was as accurately as possible during this era. And they've even like faithfully recreated the city maps based on the city itself. And I think that's really cool. But anyways, let's get into each of these NPCs and we'll talk about what's happening here. So this is our informant, okay? Basically, this is where we accept missions or do excursions. And there's a few things we need to manage. We need to manage morale, we need to manage attrition, we need to manage supplies coming in, and momentum. Most important thing here is that if the momentum reaches 0, game over. We lose, all right? There's excursions, which at some points will give us an opportunity to increase the morale of certain districts, and we'll talk about why that's important in a second. But you have to spend supplies in order to do that. So we'll come back to this in a moment. The hospital, they're going to heal 25% per day right now. Any healing performed in the field is temporary, does not carry over. This is really important. I kind of touched on that already. The hideout's the only place where they're going to regenerate health over time. But you can take people out and you can heal a decent amount if you need to, but they're not going to get over those injuries. So something to try and manage. The provisioner, this is where we buy weapons, trade, repair items, things like that. Right now, this is just showing us the consumables that we have. These commendations are how we rank characters up. These are supplies, so money, currency. The compass is really important because this increases your movement efficiency. So as you get used to moving your icon around the map, you'll see how much AP is getting sucked out of it. And if you use a compass, that drastically improves how much further you can move per AP. There's also a flare, which reveals all points of interest in a small radius. So you'll have those arrows that are pointing you in a general direction. But if you want to know what's actually there, you have to use a flare. But it costs 10 AP to use, which is like 10% of your max AP. So it's a lot. And then you have bandages, also cost AP to use, but you can use it to heal people if you need to heal outside of combat. Okay. Weaponers, they will sell weapons, or we can sell weapons, sorry, that we don't need to have anymore. You can barter, so you can trade certain things that you're not using that you might get more value out of. If you want to trade them for supplies and use those for other things, as you can imagine. Ammo is going to be a key one. And then you can repair. So sometimes in loot, you're going to find broken weapons, and those can be repaired here and then used on your team. Next, we've got the Archivist. Basically, this is just a codex, and the codex is cool because it'll show you all the different characters that you've run into. I don't want to click on any because I don't want to spoil anything. Like this person here, somebody that we found that you haven't seen yet in some of my testing. Different weapons that I've run into, and notice, 8 out of 60 characters, 6 out of 44 weapons, 13 out of 28 enemies, and the enemies all do different things. They have different attributes, they have different AoEs that they can hit, different buffs. It's crazy, tons of different things in there. So that's the codex. Over here, this is the recruiter. So as I was saying earlier, you can't just hire permanent insurgents. Basically, you have to get volunteers from here. They're not really even volunteers because you have to pay to get them, but whatever, we'll call them volunteers. And you can just recruit. You're going to get people with random skills. They're out there as not just meat shields. Like this person, as an example, can ploy, which basically restores a point of stamina to somebody else, removes an activation from the enemy side, which is really good, but it costs 2 stamina to use. So in exchange for 2 stamina on Carolina, we could give it to somebody else that will benefit from that stamina, but we're also removing activation from the other side, which is super strong because they just don't get a chance to act. She also has an explosive projectile. Looks like she can target it from anywhere to anywhere. It only costs 1 explosive ammo, does a ton of armor penetration, and it's pretty accurate. So that's actually not bad. That's a pretty good recruit to have. If we wanted to hire another, it would cost us $100 bucks. Okay, but anyways, we are going to have to recruit people because we'll need to fill in some of our gaps. And then last, we have the priest who's at the morgue, which you guessed it, this is all of our dead people, which definitely we will have. Last thing before we move into selecting a next mission, This is our character overview. So we can see all of their attributes here. These traits are what come into play for different skill checks that come up in the story. You can hover over each of the skills to see what they have, what weapon they're using. This skill section allows you to swap skills. So when you unlock more, you can only have 4 at a time, and you have to swap them in, decide which ones you want to use. The colors do matter. So skills marked with a red background are weapon skills. They're meant to deal damage, consume ammunition. The available skills change depending on the equipped weapons. Different skill colors signify personal skills, abilities individual to each party member. Characters unlock new skills with each promotion. So these things are typically buffs, yellows like healing, that kind of thing. These are the weapons that are available. I think you can equip 2 weapons on each person. Does it even say here? Each weapon provides with 2 skills native to its type. You might even be able to equip more. I'm not sure, but you cannot equip 2 weapons of the same type. Important to know. And then experience, once you rank up through getting these commendations, which you usually get from completing non-tutorial mission, then you can spend it on one of your soldiers to rank them up, and you pick from kind of a skill tree. Some just get an innate bonus. So at rookie, she would get this bonus Guardian Angel skill, but then you would pick from Quick Fix or Deploy Stimulants. And then seasoned, you'd get to pick from Ongoing Care or Soothing Presence, at Veteran, Second Opinion, or Preventative Treatment. And every character has different stuff, and there's tons of different characters to unlock as well. Okay, so if I go in here to select a mission, this is going to explain how the morale and attrition work. There's 6 essentially districts that we need to manage throughout the game. You can click on the district itself. The ones that have the highlight in it means that there's an available mission there. You can also just click down through here if you want. But for now, let's click up here and we'll talk about how this works. So you need to manage morale and attrition because you need to guarantee that you have supplies coming in. If they have lower morale, they're going to decrease the number of supplies that they're feeding you. Now, as I go through these missions, take note that we're always going to have a commendation, and we're going to have some variant of a damaged weapon type. Failure means failing or ignoring the mission will result in gaining 1 attrition point. So what is attrition? Well, for each point of attrition, that means that every time you don't do something in that area, every turn or every mission that you ignore there, it's going to decrease morale by that amount. So if in Zoliborgs, which is probably not how you say that again, if you had 5 out of 10 attrition, every mission that you ignore here is going to decrease morale by 5, and then it's also going to increase this by 1. So it's a ticking time bomb that rapidly accelerates if you don't manage it. And if a district's morale drops to 0, it's going to surrender, and you don't get income or missions in that area, which is bad. Okay. So as you go around here, we'll notice this place has 40 morale. It's giving 10 per day. Some of these places have much higher amounts of morale. Here's 50, giving 12 per day. Retrieve supply crates. All the objectives are a little bit different. And here's 50, giving 8 per day. So the way that I look at this is you want to make your decision based on what their morale is, what their morale can be. Like this one, you lose morale super quick, and they give you 12 per day. We don't have a mission there, so that's fine. But here, like 40 morale at 10 per day. You also get a grenade out of the deal, reduced Nazi presence in the area. That's, I think, probably like 4 combat missions. Let's see what else. 12 per day here. So we could make the argument that, yeah, we're getting 12 per day here, so that's definitely the one that we should protect. But because the morale on this one is just naturally a lot lower, this attrition is going to impact this a lot heavier if we ignore it. Remember, the ones that have active missions, when we ignore them, they gain that attrition no matter what. This one's at 8 per day, and it's got a ton of attrition to or a ton of morale to eat through. So I think I'll probably take the approach here of going to Zoliborgs, reduce Nazi presence in the area, get a cool grenade, and supplies staying at around 10, and not hitting any of the attrition here. So when we go to deploy, a couple of things to keep in mind. Basically, we can deploy these guys wherever we want on the battlefield. And we just have to keep in mind, like, some of their positionings. We can move them when we're out there, but ideally you put them in a spot that's going to help them. So this guy benefits from being in the back line. You can see the more heavily weighted sections that they should be in. So we're going to keep him back here. Carolina, our new person, she can be literally anywhere doing anything, attacking or using ploy. So we'll maybe put her in this section. Casimir's, he can use all of his skills from the back 4. So let's put him in the back. And then Jadwiga, she can use this skill anywhere, this skill in the front, and this skill anywhere. So we'll put her in that front section, like so. Let's just double check this one. Yeah, that looks good. We'll do something like this. Maybe just in case they have like a big 3 AoE, we try to not stack them like this. But they can have AoE that's up and down as well. But I think this works, and then we'll try to navigate cover when we're out there. We also have to consider how much ammo we're bringing. So her weapon is using explosives, which are, let's see, these ones here, the heavy ammo. He has an explosive shot as well in the Piet that he's bringing. Brings clear out. And this one's at 6 ammo. And then he's using long ammo. She has a pistol, so she's using the short ammo. And I guess that's about it. We probably don't need to bring... I'm going to empty this slot, actually, because we want to have slots available to pick things up as well. I'm going to bring some of the compasses. I'm not going to bring a flare because it's really expensive, and I don't think I'm going to bring bandages right now. We'll keep these slots empty. It's another thing that we just have to balance. So anyways, this mission is going to be called Weaken the Giant. We need to reduce the Nazi presence in the area. I think that just means we have to take 4 of the 7 battles. Some of the mission objectives aren't super clear, but over time, we'll figure that out and we'll learn from it. Anyways, guys, I think that's where I'll wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more of this, let me know. Just let me know what your thoughts are as a whole. The game's available today. If you guys enjoyed the video, please drop a like on it. It helps me a lot, and I'd be super appreciative. I hope that this was a good explanation of the core mechanics of the game. This is heavily story-based. There are going to be a lot of decisions that you need to make that can impact both the battles and the overall game. Depends on... it can impact who joins your party and such as well. So anyways, let me know if you want to see more. I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your day to watch this. I hope you got something out of it. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.